Welcome to Pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. Are we having fun yet, boys and girls? I most certainly am, I must say. Pandemic is a multi-billion-dollar business. Copious forecloses, and I've got a piece of it, and that's not just hyperbole. There is an ancient Chinese curse that you might live in interesting times, and that surely we have right now. And Mandarin character for crisis is a unique marriage, perhaps queer, of two Mandarin characters, danger and opportunity. But opposites, at least in science, do attract. And they stand to remind us, boys and girls, that wherever there is danger, there is always opportunity. Because fortune always favors the bold. So be bold, like a winner, or coward in fear, as either is your choice in a natural selection and determinism. And in global pandemic, you just gotta ask yourself now, after 2 years, do you feel lucky? Well, luck is for losers, especially in Vegas, and according to Dr. Walensky, human choices have not been your friend, pal. And in this next project management simulation, we're going to engage in what the military is often referred to as officer professional development. Reviewing the initial steps in the 9-step military decision-making process, MDMP, which apparently even the military didn't perform. Utilizing our fictional management team from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And see in an after-action review exactly what mistakes the employees of Dunder Mifflin Inc. paper company did at the very outset of the public health crisis, introducing critical errors that became cumulative at the time minimum or T-min point of departure that cascaded like a snowball rolling downhill, getting larger and larger towards the T-max point of no return in a pandemic with raging infections running out of control. And without end, children and women screaming, losers. It's only 1 million lives, more fatalities worldwide than Hitler in the Holocaust, and in half the time with German efficiency and without any apparent thinking at all. I can say viruses and stupid. And as much as we may want to believe that anybody can handle crisis management, any band of 3,000 yahoos can take down the Capitol and overwhelm 3 armed security forces, even though it takes special operations guys months of rehearsal. Pandemic is a perfect empirical example of what happens when you leave professional jobs to amateurs. Nobody wins, loser. Whole bunch of dead bodies. You're fired. At the very beginning of the current public health crisis, your pandemic, the folks at the Data Institute at the University of San Francisco out in the beautiful Bay Area had reminded us all that pandemics are historically associated with fear, confusion, and despair, emotions with the feelings. And if I may be frank, that is no place for an amateur who has no idea what he or she is doing, trying to come up a very steep learning curve with no idea what to prioritize or what information to determine is critical. The only thing that occurs then is that valuable time is lost along with lives. And when crisis comes, tempers flare, emotions get hot. Whether you're in big New York City, Cedar Pines, or Scranton, Pennsylvania, only cool hands assured prevail. Otherwise, you end up with the losing situation. You're fired. So, hotshot, maybe you have an MBA from Wharton or the Distinguished Harvard Business School. Maybe you obtained certification as a project management professional, PMP, or maybe you just went out and obtained a Six Sigma certification online. But in the military, for which less than 25% of age-eligible Americans are even qualified, and less than 1% are so inclined to do so, to engage in the bloody business of warfare, rather than standing with the folks in the Ukraine, thousands of miles and safe distance apart, they have developed the military decision-making process, a 9-step methodological process from beginning to end, soup to nuts, to provide a management framework to deal with ambiguity in a crisis when it catches everyone else by surprise with their pants down. And just as everything in the military is directed by regulations and field manuals and everything else, even on the wonderful World Wide Web of the Internet, you can locate a number of these military manuals if you are so inclined to decide that you want to be all that you can be. We don't ask for experience, they say. And maybe in the next pandemic next time, which may or may never happen, you may be the man on the scene, the man with the plan in the event that we may have a pandemic next time, which appears far more likely now than long ago before a pandemic, with suddenly diseases springing up from all over to monkeypox, and who knows what shall be next, and the fumbles and people cursing at each other for failing to plan or do certain things. And so, for a pretest, the very first examination question for you, get your pencils ready, is what is the first step in crisis management? It is so self-evident that most probably will not be taught this in school. It is axiomatic. What is it? Say it with me. You must first recognize that there is a freaking problem. But that is not just a caveat at the very beginning of a crisis. You don't want to be the guy sitting on the top of the skyscraper and find out that there's been a fire burning all day. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that guy. So you want to know that there is a problem so that you can what? Do something about it. A little evolutionary pressure. But it is not just at the beginning of a crisis, but rather a guiding rule throughout the entire crisis. Because, as is so often said in military, intelligence drives the mission cycle. Not your IQ, your SAT score. This is, collection of information about your adversaries. And so leaders in crisis management are always at work attempting to acquire more information about the risks and the underlying threat to develop the clearest threat picture as is humanly possible, which obviously did not happen in your current pandemic. You want to have feedback from the lowest management units. Why? At the local level. Because they have eyes on the objective, boots on ground. They can see stuff that you can't. You may be able to give a bigger picture of you from 30,000 feet, but only they know what's going on the ground. You want to know everything about your invisible enemy. Does he have a cloaking device, especially whether what you have developed as countermeasures, preventative measures, or mitigation measures are actually working. It sounds like common sense, boys and girls, but even in your current pandemic, you'd be surprised exactly how many kids miss that on the test. You're fine. In the military, one day you may be sitting around, twiddling your thumbs, and playing foosball, but suddenly you will be brought to a high state of alert by a warning order, phone call, warning order, let you know that you have a problem. Scranton, you have a problem, and have to begin the what? Planning cycle. And this is you don't just do anything. Just doing something in a crisis is not going to help. You become a part of the problem. And this is the very first step in the MDMP, receipt of the mission, wherein it is your numero uno, priority number one, to do what? In step 2. You have received it, the ball's been snapped to you. Think about it, pal. Let's use our example in pandemic. Mr. Scott, manager at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Big Town, Scranton, PA. The date is December 31st, 2019, Mr. Scott. And you get a report that only 15 people have a febrile infection presenting a pneumonia of unknown etiology in Wuhan, with absolutely 0 fatalities. Some have a connection to the Hunan Wholesale Seafood Market, a venue measuring the size of 9 American football fields. in a city with the population equal to or exceeding the entire population of the Commonwealth of Virginia. 15 out of 8 to 11 million people in 9 football fields. The entire world is in your hands, trusting in your training, your experience, and your expertise in crisis management, your executive management skills. You are the quarterback, the team captain. The ball is in your hands, with every eye in the entire stadium looking at you to lead them to step 2. Punt or play after receipt of the mission in the form of a warning order triggering your planning cycle. Mr. Scott, what are you going to do next, Mr. Scott? Mission analysis, right? You're fired. So now that you know that there is a problem, that smoke that you smelled is actually a fire, you have one thing on your side, and that is a fact. Facts are always on your side in crisis, even when they're bad facts. You know at that compelling moment that you have what? A problem. Knowing that you have a problem is great. Not knowing that you're about to run into an iceberg is not good. And we can just move that over on the planning board to the facts side that are our known facts column. And facts, validated intelligence is the end game goal. We want to know everything about this problem. We want to move all of those unknowns in our invisible enemy over to the confirmed facts, validated intelligence side of the big board. So we know that in mission analysis, therefore, we definitely want to be compiling what? A list of facts, not fake news, medical misinformation, thing your mama told you. We want to be compiling a list of facts upon which we can rely for purposes of planning. Well, that's at least if you were a leader. So this way you can get this out information to people who are not leaders and just follow orders and do what you say. And based upon rock solid information and experience. Because we don't want to keep being fooled by a virus. We do not want to keep waking up surprised because of a single strand of RNA with no sentient thought, apparently more intelligent than us, and some of us have gone to college. We want to be compiling facts, subordinating common sense, especially when dealing with infectious disease, because we have empirically validated in pandemic that even most Americans have no idea how that works. No idea. But we do want to help fill in those gaps in knowledge by posing some directed questions, at least those of us who are leaders, about what else we need to know. We want to keep learning more, like that little robot in Short Circuit. Wanted data. Number 5 is alive, which will become, in addition to facts, our mission planning assumptions. And this is why the very, very first step in mission analysis is to draft a clear statement of the problem in quantifiable terms. It's going to help us to know what questions we actually have to ask. Yes, in a pandemic crisis where time is short, just like on the hand grenade range, where if some private drops a hand grenade, you have 5 seconds and 3 are gone, there is such thing as a stupid question. And believe it or not, if it is not tied to a quantifiable metric, a term like highly contagious or even pandemic declaration may be provocative, get people screaming in panic, but it means nothing at all to a leader trying to work the problem. And again, you'd be surprised exactly how many kids missed out on the test. Now, on May 26, 2021, after the president, who we shall call Mr. Scott, at Dundler Mifflin in Scranton in this simulation, had indicated that the intelligence community had coalesced around only 2 scenarios with a low to moderate probability, suggesting that not even these 2 theories, according to the intelligence community, was over 50% certain that either had occurred, like tossing a coin. He had suggested that we had lost time in the beginning of the emergence of this disease, and had we had the opportunity to get on the ground earlier, then things may have been different. May have been. Which sounds like a decisive statement with which probably most listening would agree, who don't do this for a living or every day. So let's rewind to two terms stated a little earlier, T-min and T-max. And on a crisis timeline, there is a T-max, or temporal time point of departure, after which absolutely no action that you might take will alter the outcome. And you can just imagine being in an airplane with a mountain just 5 feet from your windshield. T-max. And so, that's for our visual learners. The corollary, T-min, is just the opposite. How early could our teams of investigators have gotten on the ground, assuming either an escape from a laboratory, low to moderate probability of occurring, or the other presented scenario of a zoonotic evolution with low to moderate probability of having occurred? If we could predict right before a zoonosis was about to occur, it would be logical that we wouldn't have a pandemic. And if we could catch some idiot with the virus on his shoe while walking out of a lab, we wouldn't be here in a pandemic, would we now? So we can assume that T-min, time to dispatch our investigators, occurs sometime after the problem has begun. And if you want to develop a quick reaction team capability, these are terms that you need to know, so write those down. The first responders have not yet been given the mind-reading capability that the aliens the government apparently is hiding from you possess. And just like the law enforcement responding to a mass shooting scene, they have to have somebody first call 911 emergency to let them know that there is a problem, or review from that first point about knowing that there is a problem. And then, do they just do the first thing that comes to mind, operating by the seat of their pants? No. Just like this MDMP process, they have to develop a plan. So it's going to take a little time. Right, boys and girls? They don't want to wake up surprised. So, those bad guys aren't stupid. So, the earliest that we could know without, of course, spying on Beijing, as George Stephanopoulos at Good Morning America had suggested, in April 2020, we had been doing as far back as November 2019, the very first opportunity to go in with our investigators as President, Mr. Scott, in Scranton, in the simulation, has said would be at that T-min at the end of December 2019, when for purposes, again, of planning and developing the list of facts, because we're looking for facts, we had only 15 cases of infection in a venue the size of 9 football fields in a city with a population at least as large as the entire state of Virginia, with no fatalities at all, mild pneumonia at most, but it was in our news for whatever reason. Are you going to dispatch a special team of investigators with that information at that point in time to check out 15 cases of mild pneumonia? Even as late as January 10th, 2020, when the first fatality was reported, Chinese scientists with boots on ground, eyes on the objective, could not even confirm that the disease was being transmitted from person to person. You're fired. So, boys and girls, let's start putting some of our planning facts up on the big planning board. What do we know? What do we know about this virus very, very early on without getting our investigators on the ground? One, we have a disease that cannot be identified by the end of December, infecting only about 15 persons. That would only grow to about 27 of 41 cases by January 14th. in a very large venue and in a very large city. But somebody is making a whole lot of noise about this, not proportional to the threat being seen by the folks with the boots on the ground, according to all of the empirical data that we now have. That should cause some suspicion. So, are people just freaking out over 15 people being sick? That should cause some suspicion. So, in addition to the fact, we are going to want, as the process continues, to try to acquire more facts to better refine and develop that threat picture. Because it appears, I'm not saying that it happened, but it appears, especially in retrospect, at the beginning, to raise a reasonable inference of suspicion. It should have raised a reasonable inference of suspicion all the way back then. And Sun Tzu, the Chinese military strategist who had said that all war is based upon deception, had warned that when you are small, you want to appear large. That's why peacocks put up their big feathers. We have been presented in BC. They've got the peacock. We have been presented an assumption that it is an infectious disease on CNN, on all of the news shows, that is raging out of control, and that everyone in the world had better start to get ready. So we are going to need to task our intelligence assets because we're remaining calm, cool, collected. We're like Mr. Spock, the science officer. What are you, Vulcan, kidding? We're going to task our intelligence assets to, again, get a better picture of what exactly is going on to resolve these anomalies. They're going to be asking some questions. You call these priority information requirements, or even commander's critical information requirements. This is mission analysis, and if you're not doing this type of thinking, then you're probably not employed to do it. You're not an expert, and let's just say you're fired. What's next on the event timeline for our Scranton management simulation? Are you woke, Mr. Scranton? So what do we have going on in big time Scranton, PA, Mr. Scott? We have been presented an assumption that it is an infectious disease that is raging out of control, and that everyone in the world had better start to get ready in January, late December. So we are going to need to task our intelligence assets to again get a picture of what exactly is going on to resolve these anomalies. This is mission analysis, and if you're not doing this type of thinking, then, well, you're fired. What's next on the event timeline for our Scranton management simulation? December 31st, first alarm to the world. January 10th, the first fatality, and a case has spread to Thailand. January 14th, we now know that the very first case reported in the United States had arrived in Seattle, missing New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, the American cities with the largest populations of persons with Chinese ancestry, and entirely skipping over Hawaii. And he had at least 68 close contacts, none of whom were infected, after his traveling from Wuhan on a 20-hour flight, which is a long time to be crammed up in a plane with no mask, taking a 25-mile share ride without a mask, and not testing positive until about 6 days later. But the New York Times would report by April 2020 that his unique strand of virus, which he could only have by timeline acquired in Wuhan, was found in at least 39 other people in the state of Washington, which would certainly be consistent with these same people being exposed to the same batch if that biological agent had been cultivated in a laboratory. Or perhaps the still unknown zoonotic source had boarded that same plane and began a tour of the great Pacific Northwest. Just jumping right through customs. By January 20th, the WHO had tasked some researchers to attempt to predict the migration path of this presumptively infectious virus, and the results were appended to their situation report on January 23rd, in which they had listed the top 15 domestic and the top 15 international destinations for travelers from Wuhan Airport, on the reasonable assumption that an infectious virus would require a carrier human host who could transport that infectious disease to other destinations outside the area of Wuhan that had been locked down on January 23rd. And by February 26th, when the first active duty case of infection was reported in Daegu, South Korea, the closest regional enemy of China, that city was the hottest hotspot of infection in that nation, which is at least a little suspicious in coincidence. But South Korea was also the 17th most likely place for COVID-19 to mass migrate, and our coronavirus jumped over 16 others just to get there. Aren't they special, Mr. Scott? You're fired. But probably the best piece of intelligence to refine the threat picture early had appeared on CNN on January 24th, when they had, just days after our first case of infection in the United States had been determined, when they had indicated that a possible zoonotic source, which even today remains unknown, was the Chinese krait or Chinese king cobra. Now, besides the fact that COVID-19 samples were later recovered from sewage in Barcelona dating back to March 2019, this is not information we would know until February 2021. This finding of a specifically Chinese snakes is not the most important piece of information that had been early determined. We had Chinese snakes going to Barcelona, and later confirmed in a species-specific test for a potential zoonotic source in February 2020 by Wei Ji et al. And others, who had determined that the novel coronavirus possessed the highest affinity for snakes in a scientific test, or to use the scientific terminology that you should know, an Ophidian codon usage bias. This is the way that scientists talk when they follow the science. While this may not be important for anyone who had heard the term coronavirus for the first time upon the report of the novel coronavirus, which means new, and they even had to tell people that novel meant new, it is important to a virologist or a microbiologist because there are over 3,000 types of coronaviruses that infect birds, and there are over 3,000 types of coronaviruses that infect mammals. But until now, there have been no coronaviruses that infect reptiles like snakes. But the seventh coronavirus to infect humans just happened to be that anomaly before it became a pandemic pathogen that shut down everything. That at least deserves an inquiry. But that question never even appeared on the headline news at the time, Mr. Scott. But we definitely know it now, Mr. Scott. And we've heard no big updates from your big science team in Scranton. Mr. Scott, is there anything else that you may have forgotten before tasking the intelligence community to redouble efforts around two scenarios of low to moderate probability? 95% of businesses fail. Give less than 5% chance of getting COVID-19. Are you a loser or are you a winner? This briefing is unclassified, as you were. Honest, as you were. My friend, unless your daddy happens to own the railroad, we're going to enjoy a very brief acquaintance. Hey, sugar, where's my coffee? You still here? I told you, fine. Go away. You're fired. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.